Thank you all for being here. I have the honor to introduce to you one of the most dynamic and inspirational leaders I have ever met. We met years ago as members of the National Equal Voice campaign that was created to lift up the voice of working families all over the country. My first memorable opportunity to witness her strength as an advocate was when she spoke at the Fair Bay Area Summit about gentrification. It was then and there that I knew that this woman had the ability to inspire and move the masses. It was during that time that she co-created the now internationally famous Black Lives Matter, which has indeed moved the masses all over the world. We are very happy to have her here with us this morning. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker and local hero, Alicia Garza.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Good morning. Is your son Jamons Williams? So he was my first boyfriend. Tell him I said hi and congratulations. Just had to get that out of the way. I'm really, really honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much to Marin Grassroots for inviting me to share some words with you all today. Now, I know you all got Van Jones last year, and you might have noticed that I'm not Van Jones. And if you didn't notice that, I'm sorry to break that to you so early in the morning. But in all seriousness, I'm really excited to be here. Y'all know I grew up in Marin. Did you know that? Okay, well now you know. I grew up in San Rafael in the Canal District, and later on near Gerstle Park for the first part of my childhood, and then in Tiburon for the second half. So when an incredible organization like Marin Grassroots asked me to come back to my hometown, I live in Oakland now, I'm not too far, I couldn't say no. I wanted to start off today by talking a little bit about what my experience was growing up here. I know that this breakfast and this organization is really moving an agenda around equity for everybody, moving an agenda around equal voices, right? And making sure that everyone who has a stake in our economy and our democracy has a seat at the table, is creating the table, and where necessary, is turning the table over and creating new ones. I was born to a single mother who did everything that she could to make sure that her child had the best opportunities available. My mother worked multiple jobs at once in order to make sure there was food on the table and clothes on my back and a roof over my head. And only at night, when everybody else was asleep, did she get to pursue her own dreams. My mother raised me to believe that I could accomplish anything that I wanted, which was important because she was faced with extreme resistance everywhere that she turned. When I taught myself to read at the tender age of 3, she had to camp outside a preschool in order to encourage them to let me in. The costs for that preschool were prohibitive, and so she sacrificed in order to make sure that I received a quality education. She made my clothes because she couldn't afford to buy them for me. And in fact, I had 3 outfits that were reversible. Y'all think I'm kidding. You should look up my school pictures at Coleman Elementary. You might see the same, you might see me wearing the same outfits picture day after picture day. I remember my mom taking me to the fabric store that was on 4th Street and letting me pick out the fabrics that I wanted. And I remember her working late into the night to make sure that I had clothes available by the first day of school. I remember the very first thing that I read. My mom read the classified section every morning before she went to work. I remember her standing in the kitchen of our small apartment in the canal and making coffee and and talking to me. I remember her sitting down at the table, and I remember picking up the paper and reading the help wanted ads to her. I remember wanting to help my mother. I knew from a young age that she was stretching every single day to make the impossible possible. And I wanted to help her, this beautiful, powerful, fabulous, incredibly brave woman who never wanted me to know how hard it was for her to make ends meet, who never wanted me to know how painful it was for her to sacrifice her dignity just so that I could make it. I remember my mother having closed-door meetings with my teachers, and I remember hearing that tone in her voice that meant that she meant business. It wasn't until I was older that she would tell me that she had to fight to get me enrolled in GATE classes. Do they still have GATE classes? Okay, cool. Then I don't have to spell it out. When I attended Davidson Middle School, she fought to make sure I could get in those classes. I remember my teachers being surprised that I performed well in school. And I remember the stark difference when I moved to Tiburon. Now, when my mother married, she and my dad started an antiques business. My dad's grandmother was a collector, and she left her collection to my dad, who also comes from San Francisco, second generation San Franciscan, but who fell into a lot of struggles with drugs, right? And his family, right, said, until you get it together, we're not helping you. So when my mom married my dad, and they started a business together, they started an antiques business. And that meant that I got to learn history through many of the beautiful treasures that passed in and out of my house. I once brought a bayonet to school for show and tell in history class that was from the Revolutionary War. Now, y'all know today, if a black child brings a gun to school, be it historical artifact or not, that would start the long process of criminalization that would plague them for the rest of their lives. Now, in Tiburon, I went to schools where there were books for every student, where we had an extra week off of school so that parents could take their children on ski trips, where children saw au pairs and nannies, sometimes more than they saw their own parents. I visited friends in homes with more bedrooms than there were people living in them, where teenagers wore designer clothes, where the police knew your name and they knew your family and they knew what your family did and they knew exactly where you lived and they didn't hesitate to bring you home if necessary. In Tiburon, I was the exception to the rule rather than the rule itself. So you might be wondering why I tell this story. And I tell this story because oftentimes when we talk about equity, we use a lot of numbers and statistics, but we have to start using more stories. I know we're here and we're supposed to be talking about Martin Luther King and the dream. Thank you, love. We're supposed to be talking about how his work and his words changed the world. We're supposed to be talking about Black Lives Matter and this beautiful movement that is catching fire across our world, and we're gonna get to that. But I begin my remarks this morning with this story to remind us that there are many, many little black girls and black boys right here in Marin County who will never get to move to Tiburon. Communities of color and immigrant communities are struggling to make ends meet in one of the wealthiest places in the world. And that's why today, right this second, we have to commit ourselves even more to achieving the laudable goals of abundance for all of us, because that's easy to forget in a place like Marin County. So here we are, and we are celebrating the birthday of the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Here we are in the midst of an incredible movement moment. And as Erica mentioned, myself and two of my sisters, Patrice Cullors out of Los Angeles and Opal Tometi out of New York, started Black Lives Matter in 2013 after George Zimmerman was acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin. Now, contrary to popular opinion, Black Lives Matter didn't just start as a hashtag. I get a lot of comments about, how do you feel about social media activism? I'm like, I don't know how I feel about it, because we're doing the work on the ground. And we use social media as a platform to elevate and to create an echo chamber for our dreams, our vision, right? Our hopes, and our deep and abiding love for humanity. Black Lives Matter began as a political project, and it was intended to celebrate the resistance and the resilience of Black communities across the diaspora. Under Black Lives Matter, people across the country, and now increasingly across the world, came together to strategize, to collaborate, to organize, to make sure that we restore the humanity to our nation by ending the practices, the policies, and the procedures that devalue and destruct Black lives. Now, when we started Black Lives Matter, and I'm just gonna address this because people always ask me, we heard from a lot of folks, and people said, but all lives matter. Why are you only isolating Black lives? And I have a few things to say to that. Of course, all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. But unfortunately, that is a utopia that we are striving towards, but it's not the world that we live in today. And so my short answer is that if we really believe that all lives matter, then we will fight like hell today for Black lives. Now, why is that? We know that Black lives and Latino lives are at the losing end of almost every disparity that you can think of, whether it be health access, whether it be education, whether it be jobs, job quality, employment, whether it be access to public transportation, quality public transportation, quality childcare, quality elder care, every disparity that you can think of, Black lives are at the losing end. So our question is, how do we change the policies and the processes that place Black lives at the losing end of every disparity? How is it that we actually create equity for all lives? Now, when we started Black Lives Matter, our goal was to create new political possibilities. As police violence began to gain visibility as a national epidemic, and let's be clear, police violence has been happening for a long time. And I'm so appreciative to my sister here who lifted up, right, that the initial intention of policing, right, wasn't to solve problems. It was to catch slaves and return property. We know, right, that police violence is not the only epidemic that we're dealing with, although it is an incredible epidemic. And we know that the goal of Black Lives Matter can't stop at this question of reforming and transforming how policing happens in this country. Instead, we know that we must be clear from the beginning that our fight, our work, is to create a better world where young Black people can expect to live beyond 25. We know that our work is a world where we no longer have to remember the long list of names and faces of Black people who are killed every 28 hours. Every 28 hours by police, vigilantes, or security guards. We know that our work is to create a world where we advance the goals of a movement that so profoundly changed the landscape of this country. Education, housing, ending segregation and disparities, peace and democracy are still at the top of our agenda. We have not yet achieved the dream. We still have work to do. Now, in the same way that Rosa Parks and Tired Feet did not spark a movement for civil rights and human rights, Black Lives Matter is not a spontaneous protest movement. Rosa Parks was an organizer who, together with others from the NAACP, was determined to end segregation in this country. Black Lives Matter was created by 3 women, Black women, 2 of whom are queer, 1 of whom is the daughter of migrants from Nigeria, all of whom are organizers determined to end state violence in all of its forms. Black Lives Matter is carried forward by all of those who yearn for justice, who yearn for democracy, who yearn for freedom, and who fight for dignity for all of us. So what does Black Lives Matter mean here in Marin? How do we create new political possibilities here in Marin County, in my hometown, for low-income families, for women, for the LGBT community, for the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, for migrants, for working class people? What does Black Lives Matter look like here in Marin County? How do we get closer to the dream that Dr. King inspired us all with? First thing we need to do is support the organizations like Marin Grassroots that work tirelessly every single day, often without recognition. Organizations that do the important work to make sure that low-income communities are not just at the table, but are empowered to speak for themselves, are empowered to shape the policies and procedures that impact our lives. That means investing in grassroots leadership. That means investing in the kind of training and support that Marin Grassroots provides, that ensures that there's people from impacted communities who are developing those policies. It means investing in organizations like Marin Grassroots, who help to develop new leaders to sit in the halls of power. It means investing in organizations like Marin Grassroots so that we can have more people from impacted communities sit on boards and commissions, again, that are making the decisions that affect all of our lives. And again, as I said, we know it's not just about a seat at the table. We've done that, right? We now have Black elected officials. We now have Black folks sitting on boards and commissions, right? But we have not yet transformed power relations. That is our next fight. We must transform those relationships, build power from the ground up, and advance power that is connected and accountable to our communities. That is the next stage of the civil rights movement. Y'all don't hear me though. That is the next stage of the civil rights movement. Now I want to address something as well in terms of racism. We often talk about racism as if it's about people being mean to each other. We hear a lot of coded language, like racial tensions. And then the response to that is that we need more dialogues so that we can decrease the tensions. But the tensions are systemic. The tensions are systemic. And so when we talk about ending racism, sure, we should all be nicer to each other. That's absolutely true. But we also have to transform the systems that make it so that communities of color, immigrant communities, low-income communities are at the bottom of the heap when it comes to access to resources, access to housing, access to a dignified life. Now, according to the US Census, Marin County is 80% white, 3% Black, 15% Latino, and 6% Asian. Now in San Rafael, where I spent the first part of my childhood, the per capita income is $42,000 a year. In 2011, excuse me, it's old data. And by per capita income, I mean the average income per person. In Tiburon, where I spent the last part of my childhood, the per capita income is $97,000 a year. Why is that? Why is it that the per capita income in Tiburon is more than twice that of the per capita income in San Rafael, and more than 3 times the per capita income of Marin City? Who makes up the majority of suspensions in schools in Marin? And where are those schools? Who has access to quality public transit? Who has access to quality housing? What is the quality of jobs in our community? Who makes up the majority of stops and other engagement with the police? And if the answer is that low-income communities, especially Black communities, are on the bottom end of that seesaw of our economy and our democracy, then we have to ask ourselves why, and what do we plan to do about it, most importantly. In other words, what kind of world do we want to live in, and how do we get there? Now, here in Marin, that means investing deeply in Black communities so that jobs, schools, and housing improve. It means making sure that elected officials and policymakers have a criteria that they use prior to making big decisions about land use, transit, housing, the economy, education, right? And that needs to require that we meet a set of principles around equity. It means that making sure that the people who are making the decisions reflect the communities that they serve. It means that little girls like me, I'm sorry, is there an issue? Let me just finish my speech and then we can talk afterwards. It might even mean that little girls like me have a fighting chance. Now, here's one thing I know for sure. If Black Lives Matter here in Marin County, you will do everything that you can to support this organization. You will support Marin Grassroots. And when I say support, I mean you will invest your money. When I say support, I mean you will invest your time. When I say support, I mean that you will listen. When I say support, I mean championing their agenda and moving it. When I say support, I mean that you will be by their side, no matter what. Now, on the eve of Martin Luther King's birthday, let us root ourselves in the conviction that it is our duty to restore the dignity and humanity, not just of our country, but of our world. That we have nothing to lose but our chains, and that we are the ones we have been waiting for. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you.